Thank you, thank you. Some of the longtime members here will remember Jan and Ted Besta. When I arrived in 1990, Jan was the treasurer of the congregation. Ted was the person, without fail, who stood in the back of the sanctuary, counted who was there, and then evidently he seemed to go into the kitchen or the lobby to write in the back of the membership book the count in his little careful handwriting. It's possible then he went outside for a smoke, but I was inside, so I don't know. Early in my time here, their young adult daughter Molly came back and I was part of her wedding. So flash forward a lot more than 30 years, and Molly is a congregant at Unity Temple, where I now serve. Of course, we swap stories about our beloved fellowship. In fact, I sat next to her at something yesterday, and she sent me a picture of the moose knocker that was the door knocker on the old Moose Lodge building. Ted had it in a coffee can, and when Jan died, she found it, and I'm going to try to get it back here. Anyway. It quickly became evident, though, that when we talked about the fellowship, our beloved fellowship, we were from two very different eras. Molly grew up when the congregation met at the old Girl Scout headquarters, and I never stepped foot in the old Girl Scout headquarters. Molly grew up and didn't really go into the Moose Lodge after the congregation bought that. It's interesting that the founders of the congregation in 1955 mostly had young families. And so they focused on creating and coordinating Sunday morning adult programming as well as a religious education program for their kids. But by the time Molly came along, most of that first generation's kids had aged out, and there weren't many kids, and there wasn't much of a religious education program. And most of Molly's memories were in the Girl Scout headquarters living room, sitting through the services. Well, by the time I arrived, the congregation had owned the former Moose Lodge for close to a decade. The religious education program had restarted, first around the brass bar in the basement, and then in the beautifully remodeled classrooms. I share about kids' experiences at the fellowship to observe that there are many different lenses for viewing and reflecting on the different phases of the fellowship's 70 years. And most commonly, congregations visualize the phases, the eras of their history through buildings or through ministries. So in my 25 years here, we had the second half of the old Moose Lodge phase, the new building phase, and then 18 months of the new building plus sanctuary phase. And I'm guessing y'all don't really typically call this the new building anymore? Yeah, it's weird. They don't in Oak Park either. The building was built in 1905, I get it. But there was a predecessor church. But whatever lens we use, each one is unique. Molly's experience was different in so many ways from the experiences my kids had growing up in the fellowship. My experiences in the 1990s with that small congregation in an ugly building, sorry Moose Lodge fans, was different than my last 18 months with this space. So the Fox Cities in 1955 was different in so many ways from the Fox Cities of 1990 or 2025. Change, change, change. This is congregational life. This is life. When we celebrated the congregation's 50th anniversary, founders Bill Dunwoody, Donna and Len Wise, and Margaret Ferris were part of the celebration. Incredibly, that's close to half of the people at that very first meeting 50 years earlier. And for that 50th anniversary, Reverend Max Gabler drove up and was part of it. He was the person that, from First Unitarian Society in Madison, who nudged the Dunwoodies to get a meeting going, paid the $5 for the ad in the newspaper, and who drove up to speak at that first initial gathering. Now all those folks are gone except Donna Wise. And actuarially, I am unlikely to be at the centennial celebration of the fellowship. So this is congregational life. This is life. But there are things which abide through the phases. And I was always struck, including this morning at the 9 o'clock service, by the commonalities of what people shared about their feelings as they first came to the fellowship. So there was someone at 9, first time at a service, and the words that he used were, I feel so welcome and included, and just like I'm in a place that's going to be a home. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the feel of it. And that's the same thing I heard in 1990 when people came in the Moose Lodge. It's the same thing I heard in 2015 when people came in here. There is this through line. Lines like, I felt embraced by the community, I felt valued for who I am. I got in touch with meaning and purpose in my life. And I'm guessing many of you have feelings like that as you think back. Well, when I was here 6 months ago for Steve Seek's ordination, I said, this is a quote, the path ahead in Des Moines and Appleton and Milwaukee and Oak Park and wherever we live is treacherous. There's no way to know what will happen. There are no guarantees. This was from the offertory piece the choir sang. There is plenty to lose, plenty to fear. And I want to be honest with you today that I imagined at Steve's installation I was preaching more about Des Moines, stuck in the middle of a state that's controlled by Christian nationalists. And I thought, maybe it will pertain some to Appleton, some to Milwaukee, in this purple state. But I really didn't think I was talking about Oak Park and Chicago. Oak Park is a blue bastion in a blue state. Reproductive freedom is an unchallenged reality in Oak Park and not under the same threat as here or in Des Moines. Honestly, I felt lucky and maybe a wee bit smug to be in this blue bastion in a blue state. I could focus on some of that national stuff, but mostly I could work on this developmental ministry I'm doing in this congregation, and that was more than enough to handle. 6 months later, we are in a different phase in Oak Park and in Chicago. The daily reality is that neighbors, my neighbors, everyone's neighbors in Chicagoland are being abducted by our rogue national government, literally on my street. Yesterday was one of the worst days yet in Oak Park. Because much of ICE's MO appears to be abducting brown-skinned people and maybe asking questions later, I have brown-skinned congregants who are afraid to take their kids to school or to go to the grocery store. Black military helicopters are constantly circling overhead. Landscaping and construction crews are in danger of having ICE agents pull up at any time, zip tie them, and stuff them into a rented van. A few days ago, a daycare worker in Chicago was abducted in front of those kids in preschool. Moms have been pulled out of cars in the line picking up kids from school. Neighbors yanked out of their families, out of their lives. And the main point of all this is sowing terror on brown-skinned people in blue cities. Our government is terrorizing whole cities and metropolitan areas. And those of us with privilege, for example, white skin, so I'm not likely to be abducted, are called to find ways to respond. And there's no right or wrong way to respond. The only wrong is to retreat into privilege and denial and ultimately indifference. So I have congregants who are part of human school buses, white parents and other volunteers escorting brown-skinned kids home from school. I'm one of many in my congregation that when we go outside, we put on our whistle. And it's blingy, so people see it. And when we see someone getting abducted, we blow our whistles, we start filming with our phones, and we call a hotline to report the incident. There is in every community in Chicago rapid response teams who get the word out and warn people. Our whistle blowing doesn't often save the person being abducted, although it did once yesterday in Oak Park. Yes. But every time we blow a whistle, there's going to be someone who hears it, who hides, who isn't the next person abducted. Every time we film an abduction on video, it has the potential to shock one more person into action. Videos of ICE agents casually throwing tear gas out their windows as they drive away so that people like me get gassed. These videos can wake up the conscience one person at a time. So this rapid response of Chicagoans is really extraordinary and really inspiring to see. And we are giving everyone else in the country a blueprint of how to respond effectively if, when this terror is visited on your communities. So for me, another part of living my Unitarian Universalist faith in Chicagoland today is showing up every Friday morning at the ICE detention center 4 miles from my home. ICE abducts people and they get warehoused there, and every Friday morning they get transferred to who knows where. So we gather. 3 weeks ago, UU clergy and musicians led an amazing flower communion service across the street from the ICE detention center. And I can't say this because it's without being moved. 2 days ago, I was there. There's these barricades, concrete barricades. 15 moms jumped over the barricade. They sat down in the middle of the street in a circle, held hands, and each one was arrested. It was inspiring. And until that moment, I didn't think I'd be one of the people to go over that barricade. I'm going to be one of the people to go over the barricade. The plan is soon, like in the next week, to have 100 ministers go over the barricade. So y'all pay attention, right? And it's not about us, it's about what's going on in that building and what's going on in our country. So this is all really different from what our efforts here for marriage equality looked like in 2014. I never even thought that there was any possibility of me being arrested or any of us being arrested. That was a different time, a different phase. Life has changed. Life calls us to change. So I didn't expect this is what I'd talk about in the sermon today. I have a feeling maybe Christina and Hannah didn't think that was what I do either. And I do want to say, with all this heaviness, that there is also plenty of joy and celebration that we're trying to find in Chicago. We're trying to find the galaxy held in our hand in this broken glass. And there's the joy here of 70 years of this fellowship growing and thriving and being what this area needs, what you need to be people to be whole people, to be part of what makes this part of Wisconsin a more just, fair, equitable, wonderful place to live. And I thank my lucky stars that I was part of the story for 25 years. Okay, then I think back to 1955. Joe McCarthy's Appleton. This congregation was birthed in a difficult time at a focal point of a scourge that was shaking the nation, threatening the rule of law, threatening democracy, and in its own way, that new Fox Valley Liberal Religious Fellowship and its core commitment to freedom of conscience was, in fact, countercultural, we might call it an act of resistance. That was what Unitarian Universalism looked like in 1955. Our protests for marriage equality in 2014 were what Unitarian Universalism looked like in 2014. And what you are doing here, what we are doing at Unity Temple in 2025, this is what Unitarian Universalism looks like today. Every phase matters. Every phase has beauty and challenge and sometimes even horror. Small talk, glass, and galaxies in our hands. The fellowship has transformed, is transforming, and will transform lives. The fellowship saved, is saving, will save lives. Every phase, every phase. So I came here in 1990 and I said, count me in, count me in. You're all saying that now, and may it be so for another 7 decades and beyond here. And may there be someone here who's in their 20s, who's at the fellowship's 140th anniversary celebration. And they will be thinking, yep, phases, different and beautiful and hard phases, keep counting me in. May it be so.